Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have this week are further relaxation of the various restrictions on social gatherings and interactions in America. This follows an increase in the number of individuals who've been vaccinated. There's evidence that we really should remove warning labels and allow natural selection to take its course, and the discovery of archaeological remains of more than 40 individuals in giant pots. These and other news items will be covered this week, and you can find timestamps for each in the description below. Let's start with mask mandates and vaccinations. At least on the federal level, America has accepted that those who are fully vaccinated, that is either a single dose of a one-dose regime or both doses of a two-dose regime, may now go about their lives with far fewer restrictions. This includes no longer requiring a mask or social distancing. Admittedly, many states in America have been less than successful in following these restrictions anyway. The fact the federal government is relaxing the limitations is not necessarily a sign that the states are in the right way. Instead, it means that at least the federal government believes vaccinations have been successful enough and are impacting enough of the population that they can consider it successful. Masks and social distancing was always intended to be something of a bridging solution. It was never intended to be the be-all and end-all of ways to solve the pandemic. It would delay the outbreak and slow it down enough that it would never reach the point where it would overwhelm medical systems. The same sort of phenomena we saw in Italy and are currently seeing in India. This news does come hand in hand with some less desirable news. Currently, about 2 million doses are being given out each day. The peak back in April was about 3.3 million doses a day. That means it's decreased by about 33%. As mentioned, the reason for this is simply that enough people are being vaccinated. Despite that, there is still a large part of the population in America at least that has reticence or hesitancy about being vaccinated. Different states are making different efforts to resolve these issues. At least in Ohio, they're running a lottery. The plan here is to give 5 people $1 million each, and they'll get an entry if they are vaccinated. Admittedly, the way they're raising the money for this is rather questionable. They're taking the money the federal government is giving to the state of Ohio as relief money for the CCP virus and are using it to fund the lottery, while paying up to 5 people $1 million each for being vaccinated. The state is also lifting many of its current restrictions. It would seem somewhat counterproductive to both have trouble getting people vaccinated and removing the restrictions that would in some ways encourage them to do so, but also help to bolster the frontline staff and capacity of medical services. Ohio may not be one of the best states, but it's certainly not the worst, as far as America's performance with the CCP virus goes. Briefly touching on India though, India continues to exhibit some of the more unexpected and unusual diseases coming hand in hand with the CCP virus. The one that has been most eye-catching this week is a continuation and expansion in the number of cases of a rare fungal infection. This is a disease called mucormycosis. It is a visibly black fungus, and it grows around, as would begin by the name, mucous parts of the body, eyes, nose, and similar. It can also be found in the wild. Although some people do have it occurring naturally in their skin, it's kept in check by the immune system. Whether this is antibodies, immune cells, and more, there are ways to keep it in check. But once you have a second disease, like the CCP virus, that demands so much of the body's time, resources, and effort, those parts of the immune system no longer get the supplies they need to keep it in check, and so it has an opportunity to begin acting as a pathogen and infecting the host. Once it infects someone, it can spread throughout the bloodstream and start hitting other organs. The brain, eyes, spleen, and heart are the big concerns. The second concern that builds on that is that you don't necessarily have to be currently infected by the CCP virus to be infected by the mucormycosis. A number of individuals have been infected following the resolution of their infection with the CCP virus. This means that the effect on the body is enough for a long enough period after infection is resolved that someone can be infected by another disease that can then cause even more problems, particularly when you consider that the CCP virus already affects the heart, and now you have a second disease that can complicate that damage even further. There are questions about whether or not the current outbreak is tied to the treatments used for the CCP virus, particularly around the use of steroids. Steroids, notably corticosteroids, can suppress the immune system to a degree. This would have a similar effect to occupying the immune system with the CCP virus, but in conjunction with it, you begin depleting the body's reserves of immune material, particularly cells and cells that can be used to deal with a new pathogen. Complications of mucormycosis include having to have various parts of the body surgically removed due to infection. Depending on the individual's circumstances, this could be nominally better than death from the CCP virus, or it could be just as bad, depending on the impact it has on them and their lives. Going back to America now, and rather than looking at the CCP virus, we're going to look at an effect from the current issue with hacking of a gas pipeline. Various individuals are demonstrating why we should never have put warning labels on packaging. Specifically, why we should never allow natural selection to not take its course. Government agencies had to issue official guidance not to put petrol or gasoline into plastic bags. Yes, it's understandable that there's desperation about, especially with petrol having a massive increase in price recently due to the shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline and a reduction of nearly half of the East Coast's petrol supply. That doesn't mean that this is any more sensible. As you may or may not be aware, petroleum and petroleum distillate products are extremely good solvents. This includes dissolving plastic, such as the bags that are being used to store it. It is perhaps an excellent example of not only people acting in dumb ways, but also, importantly, what can happen when people aren't aware of the context of a post. The warning issued by the US Consumer Product Safety Commission says in no uncertain terms, do not fill plastic bags with gasoline. And it seems to have been put out in response to a viral video of a woman pouring gasoline into a plastic bag. The video and pictures associated with it appear to be quite old, at least according to Snopes. The fact that somebody has in the past been willing to do this, and quite possibly is still willing to do it, should be a warning sign for everyone. In some ways, you could compare the idea of storing petrol in a plastic bag like that as storing gas for a barbecue in a balloon. It might work temporarily, but in the very near future, the balloon would begin to break down and degrade, releasing the very flammable and very reactive gas into the local air, where it could cause a lot more harm, even unintentionally. Going now from the unintentional harm to the weird and interesting. The discovery of over 40 tombs in Corsica. These are a sort of necropolis, and each tomb contains large jars filled with human remains. Corsica, if you aren't aware, is a large island off the southern coast of France. It has a wide and varied interesting, some of it more unusual and unexpected than others. Sometimes it's been involved in very famous historical figures, such as Napoleon. In this case, it's the examination of a cemetery that's proven unusual and interesting. The remains seem to have been put there sometime between the 3rd and 5th centuries. This is about the end of the Roman Empire. It was full of large clay vessels. These large clay vessels rather than carrying the more typical or expected wine, appear to have had bodies in them. Lots of bodies. In another ancient historical curiosity, we now have a better understanding of just how the aqueducts were kept clean and managed to continue to provide potable water. Modern infrastructure to bring water that's in an established system often requires sterilization plants and other ways to keep water clean. This ensures that large parts of the population that could be supplied from water kilometers upon kilometers away aren't going to find themselves suddenly being poisoned. The Aqueduct of Valens explains some of this. The Aqueduct of Valens supplied Constantinople, currently known by the name of Istanbul. The aqueduct could have been supplying water from over 500 kilometers away at its maximum length, and possibly as little as 120 kilometers away by current measurements. The whole system uses some interesting and unique quirks and design features to keep itself clean. They know that this is the case by looking at limescale or calcium buildup in the aqueduct. The evidence suggests that there's only 30 years worth of buildup. That means in the roughly 700 or more years that it's been not used, this aqueduct only had 30 years worth of deposits accumulate. That is a fraction of its functional lifetime. The way this appears to have happened is that they had two channels, one designed to take over while the other was being cleaned. This allowed them to close off one channel, send in a crew to clean it up, and let the other channel continue to function. It meant Istanbul would never have run out of running water. There may have been a reduced supply, but it would never have stopped. The final news item we have this week is about the Chinese rocket, the Long March, that returned to Earth without being controlled. It's the first such large rocket that's gone into space and not been returned without some planned re-entry. In fact, it's not been since the 70s that this has happened. Over the last few years, China has pulled this stunt several times. The most recent was an 18-ton rocket that came down, with parts of it falling in Africa. In this case, the 21-ton Long March 5B rocket returned to Earth, with debris falling down in the Indian Ocean, somewhere between Sri Lanka and the Maldives, although it appears to have been closer to the Maldives than anything else. The concern with this phenomena was that a rocket is made up of a large amount of material, and certainly not all of it will necessarily be destroyed on re-entry through heat and friction. It doesn't take a lot to create a very large impact. In fact, very small amounts of solid mass can create a lot of damage very easily, and if the rocket breaks up in the right way, that damage can be spread out over a very large area. While most probably going to land in the ocean, given that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, there is a good chance still, roughly 30%, that it would hit a landmass. And of these landmasses, there's a good chance again that it may hit a populated center. This is why, despite China's outcry, there was a good deal of criticism aimed at their failure to create and design a rocket that they could deploy and return to Earth in a controlled manner. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you've found it interesting. If you have, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.